It's always helpful to talk to people who've been inside the belly of the beast. Today, on GovCon M&A Talk, we'll speak with Sam Lee, one of only two people to have ever served as SBA's Director of Procurement Policy. Now in private practice, Sam has a blog where he analyzes GovCon from a legal, regulatory, and data perspective. Get ready to hear a lot from lawyer and former insider Sam Lee. This is GovCon M&A Talk, presented by Orange Slices. I'm Sharon Heaton of sbLiftOff, and I live and breathe GovCon M&A. So let's talk deals. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today.
So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Truly pleasure to hear you are one of the real experts on so many different areas of what's going on in the small business world. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and let's start off with the area that seems to be under most attack, which is the 8A. Now, let me say that as an M&A advisor, we generally don't try and sell 8A companies because they are very challenging to sell. Now it seems as though the administration is making it very hard to be an 8A participant. What do you see happening in the 8A program at this point?
Well, that's so interesting that you mentioned selling 8As. They are difficult to sell because there's a requirement that the SBA administrator provide a waiver of a transfer of 8A contracts. And that waiver used to be easier to get. Now I hear it's very hard to get. And that's consistent with the way that SBA has been treating the 8A program during this whole administration. We've seen, first of all, it's hard to get a waiver. It's also very hard to get an application through. There are reportedly hundreds, if not over 1,000 applications that are just sitting there waiting to be acted upon because SBA has not, at least based on the data that I've seen, granted an application since August of last year. So you're talking about
Wow.
9 months
I want to talk
now.
something about the M&A part of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but on the 8A, you talked about getting a waiver, and that's hard. But the real issue from an M&A perspective is that the contract doesn't really belong to the 8A company, it belongs to the SBA.
Right.
So you must get novation from the government if you're selling an 8A. If you're selling a designated company that's not 8A, if you do a stock deal, those contracts transfer. But on an 8A, you absolutely have to get approval from the SBA for each one of those, the novation process. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you go to an 8A contract and look at the FAR clause that applies to 8A contracts, you're required by that clause, if you're the 8A, to notify the agency if your ownership changes or the company that's performing the contract changes. So that's where that waiver, that novation comes into play. So what we're seeing now is it's hard to get in the 8A program. And then if you're in the 8A program, the number of awards that are going through the program has dipped. We've seen a 40% drop on sole source contracts being awarded this year as compared to 2024. If you go back before the Doge year, it's about a 40% drop. And then on competitive contracts, it's about a 30% drop there. So you're seeing a lot fewer contracts going through the 8A program. And then even for the ones that are going through, we're hearing that it's taking a longer time for SBA to approve them. Because as you mentioned, it's a contract between the agency, the company, and SBA. So SBA has to approve those contracts. And just like with the applications and with the waivers, those are taking a longer time too. Ultimately, I think where SBA is going with this is they want to turn the 8A program from a mostly sole source program, I'd say about 70% of it is sole source now, to a more competitive program. And that may help actually companies that are already in the 8A program, because if you see those competitions out there, the more seasoned firms are going to have a better shot at getting the awards from those competitions. It doesn't help companies that are new because they don't have the past performance to win those competitions.
You also talked about different sectors in the 8A program. Now, to me, it feels like there's the 8A companies, and then there's the super 8As, the tribal entities, the Alaskan, Hawaiian, Native American. What's going on for the super 8As? Are they too seeing cutbacks to getting contracts, or is it really just focusing on the smaller 8A companies?
Well, there's good news and there's bad news for those entity-owned firms or native-owned firms. The good news is they haven't been as much under target for getting terminated or suspended from the program. SBA at one point had suspended over 1,100 companies from the 8A program for various reasons, primarily because they didn't submit data, but also because they weren't compliant with or suspected not to be compliant with disadvantage rules. For the most part, the entity-owned firms have been spared those suspensions and terminations. Almost all of those companies that have been terminated are companies owned by individuals, not those owned by Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and Indian tribes. So that's the good news. The company's participation in the 8A program has continued through this whole termination and suspension process. Bad news, though, goes back to that application approval point. The entities are able to stay in the 8A program because as companies cycle out, they can get more companies in. So every company in the 8A program, regardless of whether it's owned by an individual or owned by an entity, gets 9 years. That there was a 10th year that was added for firms that were in 2020 because of the COVID year, but primarily 9 or 10 years, and then you're out. Well, if you're an Indian tribe or Alaska Native, what you do is when one of your companies graduates after that 9 or 10-year period, you apply and you get another company in, and then you can move those contracts over. You can go after the recompete. There's some rules against that related to NAICS codes, but generally the plan is you get one company out, you put another one in. Well, that plan doesn't work very well if SBA is not approving new applications in the 8A program. So you have companies that are coming off the books where they can't get new companies in to replace them. And so that's going to be a problem as these recompetes come up over the next few years.
Very interesting thing. It actually creates an interesting incentive because for a long time, if you were an 8A company, very often the only real buyer there was either another 8A company, which may not have the resources, or a super 8A. The super 8As and very often knew that they were the buyer of last resort, and the pricing that they would give would not be the pricing you might get if it were not an 8A company. Now, if there are fewer 8A companies, literally just being an 8A might be of value to the tribal entities because they would buy you not only for your work and your contracts, but for the 8A status. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So before this whole process started, SBA had almost 4,500 8A firms in the program. At this point, today, it's fewer than 3,400. So you've seen over 1,000 drop off from the 8A program because not just because SBA is not approving more, but some companies have just left the program. They've decided this is a lot of work doing the data call and annual reviews and the scrutiny, and they don't see the value in it. So the firms that are left, the 3,400 firms are left, you're right, their value might actually be higher than when they started because they at least have that status, and native entities may be looking at them just so they can get that status for a recompete.
Let me change the subject to the revolutionary FAR overhaul. We were all waiting for the Part 19 to come out, which is the part dealing really with small business. And it's come out, and it looks as though they saved the rule of two. In fact, might even argue that they expanded the rule of two so that it applies to all small business. But they seem to do that really at the IDIQ level and dropped it for the task order level. What that seems to me is that, yes, there'll be companies with designations getting vehicles, but they may not get any task orders. Am I thinking about that right?
Yes, the rule of two now applies at the contract level, not at the order level. FAR Overhaul made that extremely clear. They published several documents saying do not apply the rule of two at the order level, or at least it's not required at the order level. And you're right, the effect of that is you can get set aside at the contract level, maybe new contracts that come out or new IDIQs that come out, but you're not going to be in a preferred position for an order. You may be competing against other than small businesses on an order. That's a change from the policy of the last administration. Or the Biden administration, OFPP put out guidance telling agencies they should, not they must, but they should use the rule of two at the order level. And there was even a court case that came out called Tolliver that directed agencies to use the rule of two at the order level. But this FAR overhaul has gone the other direction. They've gone back to the the rule that GAO had used for a while, which is a contract is a contract, an order is not a contract, and the rule of two only applies to contract. Look, it's still a good thing. It's still good to have rule of two at the contract level, but it's not the expansive task order rule of two that some people were hoping for.
I think will be the implication of not having a rule of two at the task order. In addition, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to make it more difficult to protest the contracting officer's structure. So that if the contracting officer says, we're just going to go full and open or other than small at the task order, a small business can't really challenge that. Is that a fair assessment?
Right. And the FAR overhaul even put something in there to say this is not protestable. I'm not sure that they can do that. It's really usually judges or GAO that say whether you can protest or not. But at least the guidance from the FAR overhaul is no protesting the decision on whether to set aside or not set aside at the order level. That's where a lot of these issues that come up before. There was mission critical solutions. There was Oliver, a number of court cases and GAO cases that looked at the rule of two at the order level, and certainly small businesses have tried to insert themselves to push for set asides at the order level. But the FAR Council has been consistent in trying to limit the possibility of protests at the order, and this is an oft protested issue. They want to take this one off the table.
Significance of this for small business. I mean, it's wonderful to get a vehicle, but if you can't get a task order, it's kind of, as we used to like to say, having a multiple award vehicle is a wonderful fishing license, but it's the fish that you care about. What does this say about what this administration's view is about small business or how small business should compete in this revised market?
Well, it really pushes agencies to use pools or set asides at the IDIQ level. So as long as that's still out there, as long as you have, Oasis Plus Small Business or Polaris Hub Zone, as long as you have those, then the small businesses still have a preferred position. It's when you start mixing the small businesses with the large businesses that it hurts small businesses as compared to if they had a set aside at the task order level. Look, SBA has been very successful in increasing the amount of dollars that go to small businesses. The goal is 23%, and the government is spending upwards of 28% with small businesses. So there's not a thought that you're going to go beneath the goal. Maybe there should be a thought that the goal should go up more than 23%. But they've been able to push money to small businesses. Now, is it the right small businesses? Is it the small businesses that are innovative and new, that maybe selling commercial and looking to go to the government? That's a bigger question. We've certainly seen the number of small businesses entering government contracting go down a lot, 80% between 2005 and 2019. We've continued to see those numbers go down. So it's not as welcoming an environment. And I think not using the rule of two at the order level indicates the government is gonna help you to some extent, but they feel like when they've gotten to 28%, maybe they've done enough.
Very fair. Let's talk about a specific vehicle which is getting a lot of press at this point, MAPS, MAPS.
Right.
And there's been a lot of criticism on that as to whether or not it's fair for small business. There's some question as to whether or not there needs to be past performance at both the prime level and the sub level in order to have either a JV of some sort. Can you talk about what are the small business concerns associated with the MAPS vehicle?
Sure. The MAPS is going through this decision about joint ventures and Mentor-Protégé, and we've seen this with other vehicles as well. I think Oasis Plus was tripped up because of it. Alliant as well, I believe, was tripped up because of the Mentor-Protégé joint venture. The issue is if you're in a joint venture and you're the qualified firm, how much past performance do you need to have as the qualified firm? A lot of times the small business is fairly new, or it's just trying to take advantage of a particular certification, like with 8A and in Oasis Plus. And it's really the mentor or the joint venture partner that's bringing in the past performance and corporate experience. Agencies now, under a new SBA rule that we put in place in January of 2025, can look entirely at the mentor past performance. I don't know that agencies have actually done that, but SBA's rules actually allow them to use their discretion to weight past performance all toward the mentor, all toward the protege, some mix of that. They come in court several times, and SBA issued a rule saying, look, it's really up to the agency to decide what to do. So as far as MAPS is concerned, I don't think they'll get into the same holding pattern like Oasis Plus did, simply because the rules have changed, and now that rule change has been reflected in GAO precedent as well.
Explain to me what the rule change is. Is for what's going on in MAPS basically saying that the designated set-aside company has to have the past performance for the vehicle, or can they rely exclusively on the past performance of the mentor, which is usually the larger company?
Yeah, and on the specifics of it, that's up to the agency, and they need to define that in the solicitation. I mean, I should note that the rule still says if you're looking at a mentor-protege joint venture, the protege can't be required to have the same level of past performance as a non-joint venture. So if you have a mentor-protege joint venture and say the protege needs to submit 3 examples, that has to be somehow diminished as compared to a company that's bidding on its own. So it could be the number, it could be the level of that past performance, perhaps what the threshold is for the dollar amount of that past performance. So there still is that discriminator in the mentor protege joint venture past performance rule. However, SBA allowed agencies to have much wider discretion in deciding what type of past performance to take from mentor protege joint ventures, just because it had gone through litigation over and over and over again, and it was really slowing down the awards of new contracts.
So I'm trying to deal with the fact that so many small businesses view the JVs as having an advantage over just a small business bidding on something. So this is a way of making sure that the past performance for a specific small business does not necessarily need to meet the same standards that a JV with a mentor would be satisfying.
Well, it's really helping the mentor protege joint venture so that the protege can use the mentor's past performance to some respect. I mean, you see a lot of times where the protege is 8A, the mentor is a large business, and the protege, because it's a developmental program, it doesn't have that same level of experience. It can use a couple of examples from the mentor. I think the other end of it, what you're getting at, that there's small businesses out there that see mentor protege joint ventures winning all these awards. You see it on T4 NG2, where there are so many joint ventures that won that. Those small businesses are starting to make a fuss at SBA. SBA, even under the end of the last administration, was thinking about making changes to the joint venture program, limiting how far mentor protege joint ventures could go. And I think we'll see some proposals with that in this administration as well. SBA has continued to go around the country talking about the increase in contracts going to joint ventures and how that may be discouraging small businesses from getting into government contracting, because they think the only way that you can make it is if you participate in a joint venture. So you may be seeing proposals from SBA on restrictions to joint ventures coming out in the next few months or so.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about 2025 and what's different in 2026. 2025 was certainly a surprising year. I actually thought at the beginning of the year, oh my gosh, this SBA rule about M&A and all that is going to be a very big deal. Turned out to be totally not important in light of the Doge and the contract cancellations and all the rest of that. And everything seemed to move to the right. Now we're in 2026. What do you think is the difference in 2026 versus 2025? When you're talking to small business owners, what are you saying to them about the opportunities available in the GovCon market?
It seems like we've gotten more stability. We have an idea that the government's going to spend. There's a budget out there. We're going through a normal budget cycle for FY27. You don't have the threat of Doge cuts to the extent that you had in 2025. I mean, there still are some threats. There's this DEI executive order and deviations that are out there saying agencies should consider terminating for convenience if the contractor doesn't accept the modification. So there's some threats, but it's definitely not the way that it was in 2025. I think what we're really seeing in 2026, based on the data that I've uncovered, is a shift in the SBA contracting from the socioeconomic programs like the 8A program and the women-owned and hub zone program to some extent, to using normal small business set-asides. So for a small business set-aside, you don't have to be certified by SBA. You can just sign up as a small business, and You could get protested. You could have to submit your tax returns to SBA to prove your small business status, but you don't have to do anything ahead of time to get certified from SBA. That's a big advantage for companies that are getting started, and there's a really long runway to get a certification. That can take years in the women-owned program, especially. So if you can go in and get a small business set aside fairly quickly, that may invite more companies to come in. So that's something I'm watching closely is, can we keep the momentum going on small business set-asides, and how does that affect the certification programs? The other certification program is service-able veteran-owned. SBA's tried to make that a bigger emphasis in 2026. They're changing the SBA scorecard. There was an increase in the goal to 5% government-wide a couple years ago. So SBA is really pushing the service-able veteran-owned program. So we'll see if maybe that can take up some of the slack from the 8A program diminishing.
It's very interesting. When people ask me as an M&A person, hey, I have designations. I always say the best designation to have is small business
Right.
because it's the most flexible. It's the broadest possible market of buyers. But when people come to me and say, okay, I am a women-owned hub zone, 8A, SDVOSB, it's like, okay, there's 6 people in the world who could buy that company at this point. So one of the things that I've been saying to people is, please don't start the conversation by telling me your designations. Don't start off with, I'm a small business, SDVOSB. Start off with, what do you do? Why is it important? And then it's oh, by the way, these are my designations. Is that a fair approach?
You're exactly right. The power of the certification is not to get you the contract. It's just to find a way for the agency to issue the award. So, 8A was valuable because now the agency can use a sole source below threshold. Service-able vet may be valuable because you get preferences in the VA, especially, and you may be eligible for those set-asides as well. But the real value of the company is in what it can deliver to the government. The government's buying things that it didn't buy even a year ago when I was last at the SBA. I mean, you're buying a whole lot of new AI stuff. You have a big war that's happening, and you're continuing to work on the Ukraine conflict. So there's a lot of money out there in industries and areas that small businesses might not have been tracking if they got in 2020 rather than now in 2026. I think the value of a small business is not just that it has these certifications, but that it can deliver quickly to the government. And now you're seeing a shift in the government selling from cost reimbursement and time and materials to mandating fixed price contracts. And that helps small businesses to some extent as well. They don't have to worry about having a compliant accounting system. They just have to come up with a fair fixed price, and they may have lower overhead than some of the larger businesses out there, so they could potentially be more competitive if the government's using a fixed price contract.
Very interesting. I saw the executive order kind of putting their thumb on the scale for fixed price. And truthfully, I generally find companies with better margins having firm fixed price contracts as opposed to T&M or cost plus. So from a business perspective, it makes sense. If I'm selling you a pencil, you don't need to know how much money I spent to create that pencil. You just care about what's the price of that pencil. Makes perfect sense. Is this something that is kind of pro small business to try and move to the firm fixed price? Or is it simply the government wants to get out of being involved in reviewing the financial data that they need to do for a cost plus?
Yeah, it remains to be seen how much the government's going to save from this. I suppose they want cost certainty. I mean, in my own law practice, I provide fixed price services as well as hourly services, and there's a lot more work on the recipient side, the awardee side, or the government side in this case, in providing the information to allow the business to estimate a fixed price. So, when I have a client that wants a fixed price, I want to know a lot more about what they're looking for and how long it might take and whether it's going to be back and forth and, how many phone calls they want as compared to if I'm hourly, all that stuff just kind of becomes relevant to calculating the hours. But I don't have to know it all the time. So the government's probably going to have to write better solicitations and provide more information in Q&As. And at the same time, when you have a decline in the number of 1102s because of Doge and because of the DRP. So I'm not sure how this is going to work out. There's definitely going to be an expectation the government provide more information, but whether they can do that with this reduced workforce remains to be seen.
Before we end, I have to ask you an M&A question. What are you seeing in the M&A market in GovCon for 2026? Are you seeing there being a fairly active market? Not what are you seeing?
I think it's a very active market just from the beginning of this year. Part of that is just there's a lag from 2025 when people were delaying any acquisitions because of Doge and uncertainty. Now you have regulatory certainty. You see the potential for increased defense spending, and you see this race for AI capability. So there's a lot of more money out there that may be looking to new firms or innovative firms that can pick up the task that the government's looking for there. So I see 2026 being a really big year for small business M&A.
Feels to me like the M&A market in GovCon is a little bit like what people talk about the economy in general, which is the K-shaped economy. There are some people who are doing extremely well and others who are really kind of not. And it feels that way in GovCon as well. There's certainly a lot of buyers out there, but they're all looking for wonderful companies that they want to pay low multiples for. And they were concerned, of course, about the set asides. Where if you're in Fed Civ, unless you're doing AI, cloud migration, that kind of stuff, Fed Civ's going to be a little bit more challenging. Whereas if you're in the Department of War or the IC, it looks like things are going pretty darn well.
Yeah, that sounds right. I mean, the challenge is you want long-term certainty of what this company's valuation is going to be, and there's a lot less certainty in the civilian side. You just don't know where that spending's going. I mean, I saw it with the White House budget request that came out for the agency that I track. The White House proposed to cut SBA by 67%. So that's a really big budget cut, and that's a
Really
lot
big
fewer contracts that be going out. And there are similar cuts for other civilian agencies as well. So they're really trying to shift spending from the civilian agencies to Department of War to fund the military priorities. So probably a good position to be in if you have military contracts, if they're long-term contracts, and you have a really good relationship with your customer. I think you're probably a very strong M&A target at this point.
Fantastic. Sam Lee, I want to thank you so much for spending the time with us today. It's been incredibly helpful and informative.